this lesson is for the higher pupils only. If you're in National 5, you don't need to do this lesson. You've now finished the course, so you're going to do the alternative task on Microsoft Teams. You might, however, be interested in the content of this lesson and just want to follow along, and that's fine. Now, for those of you in higher, the transcript again will be put up on Microsoft Teams. The transcript, what I'm reading from, is basically the extract from the booklet that I've written for Knowledge and Doubt that's going to be used next year in next year's philosophy class. So basically what you're getting is you now have all the notes for meditation 1, 2, and now meditation 3, which are fully complete, and they're written by me as well. So they're all there for you to access at will. I want you to use the transcript to guide you through this lesson, because what you're going to do is there are going to be intervals in this lesson. And what you're going to do is that during those intervals, you're going to go and complete different tasks which are in the transcript. So that transcript is there for not only you to follow in this lesson, but also for you to work from as well. So this is your final lesson in higher philosophy. It's quite big and there's a lot of concepts that you need to understand. So I'm going to go through it as clearly and concisely as possible. It can be quite confusing, but we're hoping, or I hope anyway, that by the end of this, through having notes that I've written myself and you having a guide to the third meditation, it should be a bit easier for you. So your title is Meditation 3. Your learning intentions that you're going to write down are to understand the different concepts which Descartes presents in the third meditation, and to understand how Descartes proves God's existence. Your success criteria, which you don't have to write down, is to analyze and evaluate the third meditation. So the third meditation is basically Descartes' attempt to prove that God exists. And he uses this, or he uses his idea of innate ideas to prove God's existence. Before we get started, just a quick disclaimer. This is difficult. There are many different terms which Descartes uses in the meditation. It's therefore essential that you pay close attention. We're also dealing with a very abstract idea, the idea of God, which we haven't encountered at all really in philosophy this year. But Descartes is, well, he was a believer in God. And what he's trying to do is, now he's proven the cogito, that he exists, he wants to now prove that God exists. And that's basically what he does in the third meditation. So far, Descartes has just found one piece of knowledge that is certain. He has proved that he exists. In order for this to be a useful foundation for knowledge, he needs to build something on it. He restates the claim that he is a thing that thinks. He also claims that, although the things that we seem to have experiences of may not exist, we do still have a thought that exists within us of such a thing. For example, I may have an experience of seeing a table which may not actually exist outside of my mind. Nonetheless, I still have a thought within me of a table. So Descartes moves on to thinking about clear and distinct perceptions. Descartes now begins to look at what else can be known in addition to the cogito. One might think that not a lot of facts about the world derive from the fact that one exists. So basically, what that means is that knowing that there's a TV in front of me doesn't seem to come from knowing that I exist. Basically, it doesn't seem very well linked. Descartes claims to be a thinking thing and that he is certain of this. He claims that what makes the claim that he exists absolutely beyond doubt is that he had a clear and distinct perception of it being true. He argues that this would not be enough to prove to him that he exists if it was possible to have such a perception and for that idea not to be true. He argues, and this is the argument below here. Premise 1, if someone or something I perceived clearly and distinctly could be false, then perceiving I exist clearly and distinctly would not be enough for me to be certain of it. Premise 2, I am, however, certain that I exist because of the fact that I have a clear and distinct perception of it. Conclusion, everything I perceive clearly and distinctly is true. So, if Descartes is correct, then he can use this as a general rule from which he can find other pieces of certain knowledge. Anything that I perceive clearly and distinctly is true. So before we move on, it is useful to consider what Descartes means by these two terms. When he says that something is clear, he means that it's present and accessible to the mind. Just as we say that we see something clearly when it's present to the eye's gaze. So if something is clear, it means that our mind can basically access it. By distinct, he means that you can't confuse it with anything else. You can't, for example, mistake toothache for a stubbed toe. The clear and distinct rule becomes a kind of test, a truth rule that should be used to help find other pieces of certain knowledge. If the cogito can be considered Descartes' foundation of knowledge, it needs to pass the clear and distinct rule if it's going to be the thing that allowed him to build upon this foundation. But still, before Descartes could move on, he reminded his readers that in Meditation 1, he had what he thought at least were clear and distinct perceptions of the existence of an outside world and the certainties of maths. The evil demon had made him doubt these earlier clear and distinct perceptions. In order for Descartes to establish this new truth rule and to be able to build on his certain foundation, he must first attempt to remove the evil deceiver from his own mind and ours by proving the existence of God. Right, so what you're going to do now is you're going to complete the questions in task 1. Complete them in your jotters in full sentences. Once you've done that, we're going to continue by looking at the possibility of a deceiving God. Descartes turns to other truths that he had previously put his trust in, such as simple truths of arithmetic and geometry. He gives the example of 2 + 3 = 5. He remembers that he had, at that time, also seen such ideas clearly enough to feel certain of their truth. Were these not therefore clear and distinct ideas? Descartes realizes his reason to doubt them now is due to his problem with a deceiving God. Did Descartes previously have a clear and distinct perception that is now open to doubt? This would undermine his clear and distinct rule. Descartes agrees with his claim in Meditation 1 that when he focuses on his idea of a supreme God, he has to admit that God could, of course, deceive him about matters which he sees utterly clearly. When he turns his full attention to an idea that he perceives very clearly and distinctly, he feels completely and utterly convinced of its absolute certainty. He claims that no deceiver can make it the case that he does not exist, and that it is not possible for anyone to make 2 and 3 added together to come to anything other than 5. When he focuses on mathematical laws, he is focusing his full attention on them. Whenever he removes his focus, he realizes that he could again be vulnerable to being deceived by the deceiving God. There is therefore a possibility that whenever he is not focusing his attention on his clear and distinct perceptions, he may be deceived by the deceiving God. He does not know if there is a God at all, therefore he thinks it's important to consider whether there is a God, and in doing so remove his doubt. Okay, what you're going to do now is complete the questions in task 2. And once you've done that, we're going to move on to some of the terms which Descartes uses in the 3rd meditation. So thus far, he is trying to prove the existence of God. He's got this idea of clear and distinct ideas, but some of his clear and distinct ideas could be a result of a deception by a god. But what he's saying is that when he focuses on particular beliefs, such as 2 and 3 is 5, he's absolutely certain of them. But when he removes his focus on them and just sort of puts them in the back of his mind, he realizes that he could actually be being deceived by the god. So complete the questions in task 2, and then move on to the next section of this lesson. So this is now thinking about kinds of ideas. So Descartes describes 3 different kinds of ideas. Innate ideas, and we've encountered these before. Ideas he believes he has been born with, such as his understanding of truth. Adventitious ideas, ideas that seem to come to him from something outside himself and which seem to exist in the external world, such as seeing the sun or feeling fire. Invented ideas, ideas that he has created with his own imagination. This classification of ideas is important for Descartes and the rest of his argument in his meditations. So this is really important. Okay, so innate ideas are ideas we're born with. Adventitious ideas are ideas that we get from the external world out with our minds. So for example, we see the light, for example, a lamp that's turned on, for example, we see the sun rising. These are adventitious ideas, ideas which we get from the world. And as well as them, we've got invented ideas, which are ideas that we create with our imagination. Right, Descartes then makes a distinction between natural impulse and natural light. And this is, again, really important. So, natural impulse is, for Descartes, an inner desire. For example, the desire to believe that there are objects that exist outside of our bodies which cause us to have experiences of them. So for example, there's a table in front of me right now. By natural impulse, I want to believe that it's there and it's causing me to have an experience of it. So for example, being able to see it. Natural light is pure understanding which cannot be doubted. Descartes claims that anything revealed by natural light cannot be doubted. He refers to the cogito as something which has been revealed to him by natural light. So basically, through reasoning, he cannot doubt it because he has come to the conclusion that he exists, the cogito, through reason. In contrast, things that he's inclined to accept as natural impulses can most certainly be doubted. And he claims that he has no good reason to have confidence in them. So beliefs that Descartes gets through natural impulse, he sees no reason to believe in them. Beliefs that he gets through natural light come from pure understanding, and he can't doubt them. So he's trying to say that there's a difference between things that we want to believe and things that are actually true. Natural impulses are inner desire to have certain things be the way they are. Natural light is something that's revealed to us and is factual. Right. Descartes then moves on to talk about degrees of reality, so different kind of levels of reality. Descartes describes 3 degrees or layers of reality. Substance, something that can exist independently of anything else. Accident, the property of a substance. And mode, the determination of a property. For example, the substance is a table, the accident is the texture, and brown is the mode. There are also, for Descartes, 2 forms of reality. Objective reality is when something, or basically something has objective reality when it represents something else. Descartes applies objective reality only to ideas. An idea of God has infinite objective reality. An idea of your cousin has finite objective reality. So basically the idea here is that God is infinite, whereas we human beings and anything within the universe is finite, okay? The other kind of reality is formal, the reality something has because it exists. Formal reality comes in 3 grades: finite, infinite, and mode. Only God has infinite reality. All substances have finite reality, and all qualities have modal reality. Okay, so Formal reality are the things which something has because it exists. So for example, because the table exists, it has 4 legs, or it's made of wood, or it's brown. Okay? Right. Now we move on to what's called the causal adequacy principle. Descartes claims that he knows by natural light that the cause of something must have as much reality as the effect. From this, he concludes that something cannot come from nothing, and what is more perfect, that is, contains more reality, cannot arise from what is less perfect. Descartes gives the example of a stone. A stone cannot begin to exist without being created by something which contains all that we can find in the stone. Descartes then turns his attention to the causes of his ideas or thoughts. He claims the causal adequacy principle can also be applied to the causes of ideas. So the cause of an idea must have as much reality as the object of that idea, what the idea is about. Okay. So basically what that means is something with finite reality, so something that is finite, can only create other finite things. And this is really important for down the line when Descartes tries to prove that God exists. So for now, you're going to complete the questions in task 3, which sum up the ideas of Descartes' idea of ideas, natural impulse and natural light, the forms of reality, as well as the causal adequacy principle. So you're going to complete those questions, and then we're going to move on to the 2 arguments which Descartes proposes to prove the existence of God. So the first way in which Descartes proves for him the existence of God is through what's called the trademark argument. In order to deal with the problems raised by the hypothetical possibility of an evil demon or an evil deceiver, Descartes' strategy was to prove that a perfect God exists, and with that there would not be an evil deceiver, as an all-loving, all-perfect, all-good God wouldn't allow this. This is not a God that would deliberately deceive you. This then proves the cogito, which means rationalism proves to be the best foundation for knowledge. Descartes was interested in certainty. He must be able to say for certain that God must exist. Descartes' strategy for proving the existence of God would be one that was done using the mind alone. He wanted to find out whether he could know that God exists a priori, through reason alone. Descartes argues that all humans have an idea of perfection. Humans are, however, not perfect. We know this as we compare ourselves to perfection. We cannot create an idea of perfection from ourselves, so it had to come from another source, as it cannot come from nothing. Basically, this means that the idea of God is proof of the existence of God. Descartes also argues that God is an infinite substance. Considering these qualities, he argues that the idea of God must have come from elsewhere, because an infinite substance has more objective reality than he, a finite substance. The idea must have come from something that was infinite. Descartes further argues that we have an idea of God in our heads. As we are not God or have any qualities like God, it cannot have originated from humanity. So the idea of perfection had to come from somewhere, but it can't have come from humanity. Descartes contends that through reason, he clearly and distinctly perceives that the following must be true. A cause must have at least as much reality as the effect. This is the causal adequacy principle. To conclude his argument, Descartes states that God has placed his ideas in our mind as an innate idea, knowledge we are born with. It is his mark of craftsmanship. Humans can't be the cause of the idea of perfection because we are imperfect. So there must exist a perfect being who placed this idea in my head. This perfect being has left his or her trademark in my mind. God is perfect and cannot be a deceiver, as this would be a defect. God is perfect and has no defects. This is the trademark argument. So what I'd like you to do is to complete the questions in task 4 about the trademark argument. So Descartes then goes on to prove God's existence in a second way. Descartes' second argument focuses on the idea that God must have caused me. I, who have this idea of God, cannot exist unless God does, because if I created myself, I could give myself every perfection. This is because creating a substance, thing, involves more power than creating perfections, properties. But I can't give myself every perfection, so I could not have caused myself. Again, if I created myself, I could have also given myself the idea of God, but as argued in the trademark argument, I can't do this either. We might think that I was created by my parents, but if only my parents were involved in explaining my creation, then they must have sufficient power to cause the idea of God in my mind. But they have no more power to do this than I do. Descartes allows that there could be an infinite series of creatures, each the next in the series, but he objects this won't be able to cause the idea of God. Since I have the idea of God, God created me and gave me this idea. This is Descartes' second proof of God. Descartes then concludes the third meditation. Descartes argues that his idea of God is something that has all perfections. Even though he claims not to fully grasp what they are, he also claims that it is evidence to him that, since God has all perfections, he could not be a deceiver. Descartes claims that it is manifest by the natural light that all fraud and deception depend on some defect. Given that God has no defect, we should accept that God cannot be a deceiver. So, Descartes has now overcome the evil demon. He has also proven that God cannot be the deceiver, and he has also, in his mind, proven that God exists. This is the end of the third meditation. So, let's consider the analysis and evaluation. So what we're going to do before we go into this section is to take a note on the second proof of God and Descartes' conclusions. What I'm going to do now is explain these different points for analysis and evaluation that you can mention for your essays on the third meditation. All of these points are made clear in the transcript. So you can follow along, or you can listen to what I say, pause it, and then take notes. It's up to you. But let's consider analysis and evaluation of the trademark argument, or not just the trademark argument, but the third meditation. So the first one is reliance on God. God has a very important role for Descartes in his meditations. In proving God, Descartes can completely put his trust in his reasoning and in his sense experiences. If God can't be shown to exist, then Descartes can't fully eliminate the hypothetical doubts of being permanently deceived. He may have established the truth that he, Descartes, exists. However, without God, he is not able to progress to trusting his sense experiences. Of course, people today aren't nearly as convinced of the existence of God as Descartes was. The next one is issues with innate ideas. The trademark argument relies on our innate idea of God, of perfection and infinity. However, some philosophers doubt the existence of any innate ideas. Could Descartes' understanding of God be something his mind has invented using his imagination? The next one is, what if there's no clear and distinct idea of God? Descartes' argument rests on his clear and distinct perception of God. It might be reasoned that the fact that Descartes' idea of God is clear and distinct is what makes it impossible that the idea comes from Descartes himself. If it were a hazy concept of perfection or the infinite, we might think this could easily be based on magnifying qualities we understand from our finite human experience. We might also imagine that this could be drawn simply from considering the opposites of finite and imperfect. Descartes claims that although he doesn't fully grasp the concept of the infinite, he nonetheless has a clear and distinct perception of it. This seems difficult to accept. Is it not reasonable to expect that having a clear and distinct perception of something requires grasping the idea fully? Another related problem is that I may not have a clear and distinct idea of God. perfection, or the infinite. Even if I suppose that Descartes does have a clear and distinct idea of God, perfection, or the infinite, it does not mean that I do. Surely Descartes has only proved God's existence to those people who similarly have such a perception. Must I simply take Descartes' word for it that he has such a perception, and on that basis trust in his proof of the existence of God? This seems to be an argument from religious experience, which, while it may be perfectly reasonable as a means for reasoning for those who've experienced it to conclude that God exists, it doesn't provide complete proof for those who lack that experience. Next up, we've got issues with the causal adequacy principle. Another challenge to Descartes' arguments comes from his reliance on the causal adequacy principle. What if this principle isn't in fact true? Descartes does claim he knows this principle by the natural light, so he is suggesting that he's completely certain about it. If we can doubt this principle, then it would undermine his proof of God. Some have challenged this principle by looking to examples that go against the assumptions which it makes. Some examples which people have suggested are things like lighting a match and creating a fire, or a whisper causing an avalanche. These examples do seem to be of an effect that is in some respect greater than the cause, but these don't really go against Descartes' causal principle. Remember that when Descartes talks about the cause having at least as much reality as the effects, he means something very specific. These effects in the counterexamples have the same reality as their causes. Next up, we've got, does the causal adequacy principle, no, we've got what are degrees of reality? So, another way that philosophers have challenged Descartes is by challenging his concepts of degrees of reality. One might simply argue that surely something either exists or doesn't exist. The concept of having more or less reality does not obviously make sense, and perhaps can be challenged on its own. If we deny the possibility of having degrees of reality, then this would undermine Descartes' reasoning for God. The next one, does the causal adequacy principle apply to ideas? Even if we accept that there are degrees of reality, and many thinkers today don't, we might still think that the causal principle only makes sense when talking about things which actually exist, or at least appear to exist in the world, substances. We might think that ideas don't have to be created from something that is as real as the things they are about. We might think that we can create ideas of things that are vastly more perfect than we are ourselves. This would perhaps be because ideas, which are modes of thinking, seem to be less real than actual substances. It seems legitimate to think that an idea of God is still much less real than the actual Descartes himself. Is Descartes' clear and distinct rule reliable? Descartes argued that the success of the cogito was down to the fact that it can be grasped clearly and distinctly. How can we know for sure whether something is clear and distinct? Even though Descartes does give some discussion of what he means by clear and distinct elsewhere, we might still be left wondering if we really can recognize when a belief we have is clear and distinct. It's surely possible to think that you have identified something clearly and distinctly when in fact you haven't. Descartes recognizes that he himself mistook his own faith in the existence of the external world, so the real world beyond our minds, as clear and distinct, when it wasn't in fact that this was clear and distinct, but simply the ideas in his mind. In Meditation 1, he spends a lot of time showing how easy it is to be mistaken when making a knowledge claim. Descartes also claims often that man is subject to error. Therefore, could we be mistaken about having clear and distinct perceptions? Is the clear and distinct rule anything more than just saying, if you are sure about something, it must be true? In order to help guarantee that we can in fact have knowledge based on the clear and distinct rule, Descartes brings his proof for the existence of God. His argument is of this form. Premise 1, God exists and is good. Premise 2, a good God would not deceive us into thinking that something is clear and distinct when it's not. Conclusion, we can therefore trust our intuition about what beliefs are in fact clear and distinct. This argument leads us to one of the most well-known criticisms of the meditation. Descartes appears to use circular reasoning. And this is the final criticism, and it's called the Cartesian circle. According to Descartes, there are certain truths that are so clear, so self-evident, that we must simply know them to be true. These include the cogito, the truths of logic, reasoning, and mathematics. He also believes the idea of God is certain. The problem for Descartes is that he needs God to establish the reliability of reason. To know that God exists in the first place, he needs to know that his mind is reliable. We might think that Descartes' argument is circular. This means that it assumes that to be true what it sets out to prove. To prove that his clear and distinct judgments can be trusted, he needs to rely on God's goodness. To know that God exists, he needs to rely on his clear and distinct idea of God. This is circular. Descartes needs some independent proof of one of these to show that the argument works. We can represent it in this way. I have a clear and distinct perception of God. I couldn't have this idea if God didn't exist, so therefore God exists. Or you could present it as God exists. God is no deceiver. I can trust clear and distinct perceptions to provide me with reliable truths. One defense that Descartes could present would be to say that he does have independent reasons to believe in clear and distinct perceptions based on the cogito. If we accept this, then perhaps Descartes' reasoning is not actually circular. Do you accept this defense? So, a lot of information, a lot of analysis and evaluation. This is the end of the higher philosophy course. We've finished Descartes. Congratulations, we've done it. So, all you need to do this week is to make sure you've completed this lesson. Next week, we're going to start essay writing for knowledge and doubt. If you're finding any of this difficult to understand, please get in touch with me. These concepts which appear in Meditation Free are very challenging. I've tried to break it down as much as I can, but if I haven't done a good enough job for you, please get in touch with me and I'm happy to go through any of the content with you, either over email or through the weekly check-in. So, congratulations, we've made it to the end of the course. Next week we start our essay writing. I hope you have a good week and I'll hopefully see you soon.